This podcast was filmed prior to the outcome of the U.S. presidential election and any post-election announcements.
Hi, everyone. Want to welcome you to Beyond Immigration Law. It's the podcast where we dive deep into the heart of the immigrant experience. We explore the challenges and the triumphs that go beyond the legal battles. Each episode brings you real-life stories that shape our immigrant communities and cultural assimilation to the pursuit of the American dream. Join us as we talk about not just laws that affect our immigrants, but also the personal journeys and the community issues that don't make the headlines. Today, we're going to be having a very unique podcast on global mobility and unveiling all the mysteries behind global mobility and the people that support the movement of people around the world. This podcast is available in video form on YouTube and Spotify, as well as audio only. On all other platforms, be sure to follow WR Immigration on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter for more information on when our episodes will be released. So just a little bit about me. I'm Charina Garcia, the Strategy and Innovation Partner here at WR Immigration. I have over 25 years of immigration experience representing Fortune 500 companies and individuals, and also family-based immigration. Myself, I'm a second-generation Filipino-American. My parents immigrated here from the Philippines. I have dedicated myself to assisting other immigrants and their families as they start their lives here in America. I also am part of other pro bono projects. If you want to see some other podcasts we have, my second podcast was my experience at the border in Mexico and San Diego. So for today, what we're going to talk about is unveiling global mobility. So this expertise converges to explore the intricacies of global mobility and immigration. Together with these three wonderful guests, we're going to dive deep into the dynamics of global mobility and immigration. We're going to give some professional perspectives and some valuable insights that guide you. It can be a complicated topic, and many times people don't understand what exactly is global immigration and what are some of the complexities that are involved in it. So today I'm here with Jaime, Rebecca, and David, and these are our three top-notch in-house immigration and global mobility experts. Rebecca and Jaime actually are associates here at WR Immigration, and David was a client of mine who's become a very dear friend as well. So I'm really looking forward to learning from this group today, and I bet those listening are really going to get a lot of value about the global mobility world and have really some deep conversations about things you may or may not normally see or hear about global mobility and the challenges. And we hope that you'll have some tips and pointers if you have some issues that you're wrestling with in your own global mobility program. And Jaime, Rebecca, and David can give you some insight and tips on how they were able to deal with some of those challenges. And so with that, Jaime, can you do a brief intro of yourself and your experience in the global mobility world?
Sure. Thank you, Charina. So for me, I'm also an immigrant, but not quite second generation. I think the term is 1.5. I'm immigrated here at the age of 3, turned 4 somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. And then I like to say 3. And, I wasn't really interested in immigration until college when I was at UC Berkeley. And I attended a Burma Human Rights Day event. So my parents immigrated from Burma. And it was the first time. It was super eye-opening for me to learn about all of these immigrant issues, because I think, at 1.5 generation, your immigrant parents are really just focused on getting you to the US, getting a good education, study. And so we don't talk about any of the other larger issues that may be impacting the community, the reason for their moves to a different country. So that was my turning point in wanting to go to law school and become an immigration lawyer. From there, after law school, I worked with Charina for about 6 years. And from there, I was like a mother for a while, did my own thing for a little bit. But then I went in-house for 6.5 years, and I'm back at WR.
Rebecca, why don't you give an introduction of yourself and then your experience in the immigration global mobility world?
Sure. Thanks, Charina. So I went to college with an undeclared major, had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. I ended up studying international affairs and anthropology. And at the time, specifically my father says, "What the heck do you do with a degree in international affairs and anthropology?" And I was equally as confused at the time. I was like, I'm just really interested in these classes and the coursework. It will all somehow work out. I ended up getting a job out of school doing, entry level immigration and global mobility work for a tech company here in Boston. Figured out I loved it. I've gone kind of back and forth between in-house and law firm experience for the last almost 10 years. And in there, I also went to evening night school. Got to keep things interesting. So I'm now an attorney at WR, but have a range of experience throughout different areas of this fun immigration and global mobility world.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, David, tell us about yourself and your experience. And I love what your LinkedIn said was with the great sense of humor and Darth Vader music in the background.
Sure. No. Hi, everybody. I'm David Nosey. So I've been actually managing global mobility for almost even 20 plus years. I've stopped counting because it's just a long time. I've actually been on the commercial side as both an expatriate counselor and a relocation counselor, as well as being on the client side. I've been a mobility professional working for anything ranging from a global energy transport giant all the way to a startup. My last role was actually managing mobility, and that kind of was an omnibus. It managed expatriation, it managed relocation, it managed immigration, it even managed the PEO, which is a professional employee organization, and it also started managing, which I'm sure you all have started, international remote work, because of the pandemic, things like that, for a tech startup, and that went IPO. I'm also I was a third generation lemon farmer. We were a lemon farmer for over 63 years before I had to call it quits. And I'm actually currently on this sabbatical. It's my first vacation, God knows how long, but I'm actually focusing on caregiving and care managing for 2 older family members. So for those of you that are caregiving and care managing or part of that sandwich caregiving, I salute you.
David is so much fun. He always finds the humor and the comical side sometimes of global mobility. So, David, let's start with you. So did you know you wanted to go into global mobility, or did you even know what global mobility was when you decided to come into this profession? What is it exactly? What is it exactly? Like, people really want to know, what is global mobility?
I think it's a very big catch-all for all these multiple disciplines. It could range literally from expatriation, which is basically sending your people abroad for X period of time to deliver a mission and then coming home. It could entail domestic relocation. It could entail international relocation, which is, in theory, a permanent change of transfer. It manages the immigration, both business travelers, short-term, long-term, permanent residency. It can encompass PEO, which is basically your go-to-market strategy where you send people abroad potentially, or you hire people abroad, even though you don't have a legal entity in that jurisdiction. And it also now includes international remote work where you're like, you've got an employee in Florida that wants to go work in Spain or South Africa or Hong Kong, and because they have a laptop and they're very mobile and they go live wherever they want to. So it really is a very catch-all profession, and really there's no 2 companies are the same. I dare you to find somebody that says, oh, we do the same as X or Y. I can tell you it's, in my 20 plus years, I can't find it. Let's put it that way.
So when you were 12 and deciding whether to be a lemon farmer or to go into the global mobility profession, what led you to global mobility instead of lemon farming?
Well, I graduated with a PhD in pottery. And then I said, you know what? I've got to do something different. There's only so many things I can put on I can hand spin. And I thought, well, there's no. I fell into it quite by accident. Honestly, Ernst & Young was building out their global employee solutions group at the time, and they were like, hey, we'd like to give you an opportunity. So it was either that or become a defined benefits analyst for towers. So it was one of these weird, I'm curious about this. Let me try this out. And I absolutely hated it in the beginning, and I didn't last very long. But then something kind of clicked, and I fell in love with it. And I think
what didn't you like in the beginning, David? What didn't you like in the beginning? Because I think this honesty is actually good, because I find that many of the people that I work with kind of fell into global mobility.
Yeah.
You're doing so great in your job. Why don't you take on immigration?
Yeah, no, you know what happens? So it's overwhelming because there's just so many variables and you don't know about because like immigration, right? It's this one, you think, oh, it's immigration, it's this one silo. It is like so mind blowing, right? Imagine how many countries across the world, imagine how many laws, and how do you do it this way and that way? And you're stuck, you have so much in your brain and you're just like, I don't know what, and you're graduating from college, you don't know any better, you know. And so that's why I hated it. But I think at the end of the day, what I fell in love with was you will never be bored. You will constantly learn something. If it's not about immigration, I literally have said, okay, I finished this one piece in Australia. Now I got to go work on this tax equalization. Oh, and now, by the way, I got to now move Jane from X to Y. Oh, and by the way, now we're going to spin up an entity in India. Do I do it? How are we going to do our go-to-market strategy for India? Like you literally are ping, 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 ping. Your brain is just constantly shifting. And before I left Procore, my last company, I had like 9+ notebooks because I just, I can't type that. I literally had to hand scribble my notes, and I literally had notebooks up to here with all my notes because you constantly are learning, and it's great. I mean, if you love learning, this is a really great profession, and you meet some wonderful people. Like, I can't tell you how many amazing people I've met, like Charina, and I've met Nobel Prize finalists, and I've met research scientists that are changing the world in this and that. So, and then you also meet the entry level, like innocent newbies, and you're just like, aw, you got to protect those because you don't want to get them jaded right now, so you kind of, and yeah.
Well, okay, so you kind of fell into it too. So Rebecca, did you kind of fall into it too with your anthropology degree and your international relations and your father's
my
thing?
first
What are you doing
job
next?
my first job was, I just needed something, right? It was either find a job or move back home with my parents. So love my parents, but I found a job. But yeah, I think, David really resonated with me of, it was so much at first learning, and, it's so exciting to get into people's lives and figure out like, okay, what do you need to move? Oh, you have a dog that we've got to move to Australia. Or, oh, your kids need a daycare in Germany. Like, every person is so specific with their needs that even within the same company, every case is going to be a little bit different because every person is different. And so I think that's been really exciting of kind of figuring out, okay, what is your story? What are you looking for? Why are you moving across the world? Your company wants you to, but there's a reason that, maybe that person is taking this job opportunity.
Well, you were probably inspired by it because you ended up going to law school and then becoming a lawyer, right? And doing immigration law now full time. So you must have loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love talking to people and getting their stories. I can tell you there are, getting deep into spreadsheets and figuring out how many days people have been in different countries. Not quite as interesting.
Maybe they'll have AI figure all of that out.
Yeah, I would love that. Or, the conversations of, hey, you've spent so much time in Canada that now you're taxable there. You have to file a Canadian tax return. Like, that part's not quite as fun.
Yeah.
But there are, good parts and bad parts to every job, I would say.
Yeah. And then you, Jaime, you basically, did you know you wanted to do immigration law, or how did you land up in immigration law?
Yeah, so I did know, when during that pivotal event I went to in college, but I didn't quite know it would be business immigration, right? I think when I came to you, Charina, I wanted to do like the sexy side of immigration and help with like asylees and refugees and trafficking. And then I realized there's no work there for me. And so I kind of landed in business immigration. And I think with mobility, I mean, that also kind of happened by accident because initially I went in-house to just focus on immigration, but quickly learned that you can't really silo yourself into immigration when you're at a large company because what you do affects so many moving pieces that I had no idea about. And so, as David and Rebecca were talking, it definitely was a big learning experience for myself too, because I think my first question as I was working was, what is global mobility? What do you mean we need to think about this? So it was definitely a really great learning experience to see all the moving pieces involved in moving a person to a different country.
Okay, so if you look back at your career, what comes out to you as one of the most challenging, can't sleep at night situations that you had to face?
I think I can't remember any one point, but I think anytime I lost sleep, it would just be because of a person, right? Like if your action or lack of action affected their move, their one date affects school, or, and so it's like, it's a lot to move to different countries, move your whole family if involved pets. And so why I would lose sleep is because, oh my gosh, what did I do to impact this person's relocation or move? And, immigration itself is so anxiety ridden that you just don't want them to have to worry about so many things. They're already worried about moving their family over.
But I mean, in the world that we live in, I know it from the immigration standpoint, but we can't control many things, right, Rebecca? So how were you able to deal with those challenges in a role where you can't control all the moving parts, right?
I think being as open and honest and letting people know up front what your policies are. So if your policy is you can work 30 days from a different country, you tell people ahead of time rather than after they've already been abroad for 31 days and, now you're taxable or whatever. um, when I started in this career, everyone was sitting in offices. Now, just even looking around this podcast, we're all in different places. We're not all sitting in one conference room recording this. And so I think that people just thought, oh, I can get up and take my laptop and go, work from, I don't know, the Bahamas. That sounds pretty nice right now. Um, and so understanding like, hey, you can't actually just go work remote from the Bahamas indefinitely. And here's why. So it's giving people the rationale, we're not just making this up, like, maybe it's a tax concern or immigration concern, whatever. There's a reason you can't do this. And here's what we do allow. So again, if it's no days working remote internationally or 30 days or whatever your company's policy is, messaging that out is super important. So people know ahead of time, like, okay, this is the rules, and then they can play by the rules.
Okay, David, we know there's some no policy written up. So how do you function in the global mobility space when there's no policy, especially during the COVID times when we were just up against so many new things being thrown at us? How do you function in that arena when no policy is even written up?
Lots of coffee. No, it was tough. I think everyone that was in mobility, this was really a tough time because do you bring people home, yes or no? That was, that's issue number one. What do you do when their visa expires in the middle of, oh my God, this immigration ministry has completely shut down and there's nothing happening? What do you do when you couldn't even find toilet paper? I remember this because I literally had to scour. And I found on Amazon, you can get the commercial rolls because remember, you couldn't find the small rolls, but you can find those big commercial rolls. And I remember sharing with my immigration attorney in the UK, like I literally took a picture of this big roll of toilet paper. And I'm like, this is what I can find here. And ironically, I think Mexico didn't have any issues. There were parts of Mexico that were perfectly fine. You could find regular toilet paper, but even the UK was like, they were laughing and struggling. So, you were just like, oh my God, like it's crazy stuff like that you deal with. And, I think the hard part is, sometimes bad things happen to good people. I think, people have lost their jobs and they're on visas or, hey, you fell in love with country X, but your business doesn't want you there anymore. What do you do? I think those are some of the challenges. And like Rebecca said, just really being transparent and honest about where you're at. And, Jaime, you like you said, you ended up picking up all these other pieces, right? Because your job just changes. You started here and it literally evolved here. I don't think I've ever had a day where it's been the same. And, again, you just deal with different issues like a typhoon in Taiwan versus, trying to move your horse to Belgium. It's like crazy stuff like that. Or like, unfortunately people lost their jobs and they're on H-1Bs, and what how do you take care of that individual, right? It's not their fault, but you don't want them to accrue unlawful presence. It's literally things like your brain, you just constantly go boo, 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 boo. And you're like, wow. And then now you're like, international remote work. What does that mean? Why can't I just pick up my suit, and go to the Bahamas? My passport says, hey, I'm allowed. I can I can stay up to 90 days or 180 days. Why not? I think the challenge is, you're right. A lot of us, what we've done has not been written down, or it's been evolving or being built up, and so you're sitting there actually building processes, and you're building, it's basically like you're riding a train while the train is in motion, and you're building the tracks, and you're just like, okay, you got to keep going and keep going and keep going. And I think the challenge is it constantly evolves, right? Remember when the beginning of the pandemic, everyone can work remote only temporarily, and then it became permanent. And now all of a sudden, all these businesses are like, hey, I want you now back in the office 2 to 3 days a week, or 4 or 5 days, or you have to be near a hub. Otherwise, you're no longer going to be employed. I mean, it is nonstop, constantly evolved. And some businesses are nicer than others, but, everyone's different. So.
Well, okay, so some of the challenges I see, which maybe Jaime you can talk about, is when we have compliance and the C-suite doesn't really understand what it's all about, right? And how the challenges can be where they don't even really understand immigration, and why are we spending so much on global mobility, right? This was the budget. You said we would spend this, and then all of a sudden the budget doubled. And are you doing a good job managing the immigration program, right? So Jaime, can you talk about some of those challenges, and how do you get like the C-suite or the upper management to understand really what it is that you do and the challenges you face, and how there is no fixed cost?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of echoing what Rebecca said, it's about communication, but there's also like education involved too, right? Not just for us, but everybody working on the different programs and policies and processes. And, everybody in management, I think, understands that there is some things they don't know and they need to learn, and we're all learning. And so I think like being able to be transparent, communicate, train, and educate, but explain it in a way where it's not just us saying no, but, like there's laws involved or policies or reasons why we have to say no, or put limits and restrictions on, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're doing what's best for the employee. We don't want to jeopardize, their statuses or their visas or anything else that might impact their life. And so it's not us being mean and saying no, but we're keeping, the best interests of our employees in mind.
Well, I mean, we deal with it every day, and they're asking, why is this person not here yet? Right, Rebecca? And what do you say? Because, Rebecca, you told me they would be ready to start on August 1st, and now you're telling me they're not coming until mid-September? How do you handle those situations, Rebecca?
I think first is you set expectations really low, because it's easy. It always comes back better if, oh, wow, great news, they can come a week earlier than we thought, then, oh, great, So, setting expectations lower, I think, is actually a good start. This might take 4 to 6 weeks, but you expect it to take 3.5. No one's going to be mad that it's done earlier.
But what you hear from the employees, and then we usually get the brunt of it as the attorneys, but my friend did this too, and it only took 2 weeks, right? So how do you usually speak to them when they come back with, my friend has this other law firm and they were able to do it in 2 weeks?
I think you just have to say, every case is different. Wherever you can show, screenshots, I think, of government websites or other things of like, this is not just Rebecca and Jaime and David saying this. This is actually, the U.S. government saying this, or, whatever relevant government. But I know like the U.S. government posts how long it takes to get a visa appointment at your consulate. So maybe your friend got lucky, got an appointment within 2 days. now you can send a screenshot of, okay, it's taking 57 days for your consulate. That's not Rebecca making this rule. That's what the U.S. government is saying it will take. I can't speed up the U.S. government. If I could, I'd be a very wealthy woman.
Well, David, for you, so let's talk about some of the ethical considerations, right? Because I've been faced, and you probably have been faced with the same thing, where they need someone to go to a specific country, and they're like, and they're going to work. They're going to work. And they're like, just use the tourist visa, right? So, David, how do you navigate that situation?
Yeah. So, I think the biggest challenge is, I think the hard part is, what is a business meeting? What is a business visitor? And what is work? And what do you do? Right? Because technically, if you're an entry-level person, work is very different than if you're a vice president, because your work is meetings, right? It's not just a simple one-for-one. And so for me, what I look at is, okay, you need them there right away. Can I fit them on a business visitor status? And if so, what can I limit? And can you do your job within this box? If not, then you're going to have to make some tough decisions, and here are the tough decisions. And at some point, it's like, and you have to basically share with that leader, like, hey, if you do this, these are your considerations. And I usually have HR or employment legal on the call, because I'm like, hey, this leader is going to be making this decision. You all are going to need to step in if something goes wrong. That could potentially put your immigration license on the line, because if you're registered in some countries, you have to register with immigration authorities. Is this enough for you to make this decision, and does it need to go even further upstairs? And I want you to know that you will now make this decision as the executive for this function, because there's some things I can do as the immigration leader, but there's some things I can't do, right? And I think the question really becomes, well, again, it's a balance, right? If you are on a contract, do you want to hit the liquidated damages, or is so-and-so really that desperately needed there that you're just going to have to take the risk? Or, hey, can we say, look, you can do X and Y, but you can't do Z and B?
Yeah.
Can you live with that? And if you can, document it the best you can and say, you must try to do this stricture. Because, I think the one biggest challenge people don't realize is, don't open your mouth, don't brag about this, don't say, oh, I'm here, and I'm, because people that are local aren't going to like it. They're already nervous of, why is somebody from HQ coming over and blah, blah, blah. So, you just got to be mindful of that. And, again, I think the biggest challenge as mobility professionals is sometimes we do get the brunt of it, right? Why did Jane get her visa in 2 weeks and mine is taking 8 weeks, kind of a thing. So it's part of the job.
If you had to give a tip, David, to those global mobility folks out there, what sort of tip would you give them as they do their day-to-day job and they face all these challenges? What's the best tip you could give them?
Under promise, over deliver. I think that's probably number one. I think Jaime, he mentioned kind of similar to the fact that you just want to be as transparent and open as possible, and just, sometimes you have to deliver the bad news, and sometimes you have to, you have to say, look, here's the situation. Unfortunately, I can't do very much about this. So this is and you're just going to power through it. And at some point they get angry and then they forget because they got other things to worry about. So as long as I think you have a pathway forward and you can deliver what the business wants, they'll forgive you at the end.
How about you, Rebecca? Any other tips you want to share that helped you get through the day-to-day?
I would say it's really important also to be as fair as possible, because to everyone's point, people do talk. And so while you can't control government processing times, if one person's getting, a $5,000 relocation and their coworker that's, traveling with them is getting $10,000, they're going to find that out. People aren't stupid. People are actually really smart, which is why you hired them for this job. And that's why you're, spending money to move them. So I think wherever you can, be fair. And as you are writing policies, if you're seeing exceptions come up constantly, that means that there's a problem with the policy. It means that people's needs are not being met if every single person is asking for an exception. And I think that's a red flag, not to the person that, I think sometimes people, they're asking for more again, like that's so frustrating. But it's, okay, if every single person is asking for more, what's not working here? And how can we make this work so that people are excited about, what we have to offer and it's covering their needs? Because at the end of the day, they're, you know, uprooting their lives for this company. So what can we do to make it worth it for them?
Right. And then, Jaime, any tips you want to share that Rebecca and David didn't mention that helped you get through your day-to-day challenges?
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca and David mentioned some really great points. I think what I can add is, we have to be like creative sometimes, but also very adaptable because, as we mentioned earlier, every case, every person is so different. But at the end of the day, I think we also need to be very empathetic to the situation, and that's going to help kind of find the best solution at times.
Yeah. So if you're listening out there, they've given some great tips and pointers of how to get through the day-to-day challenges. We're going to talk about some of the trends. So, WR does a lot of benchmarking reports, and we actually have a collective that does a lot of benchmarking. And, I just want to ask you all, what are some of the trends you're seeing in global mobility? And where do you think it's, in terms of, how do you measure the success of your global mobility program? So I'll ask Jaime that question first.
I think when you're trying to measure success or show success, especially to upper management and execs, it's just all about numbers, right? They want to see numbers. How many people, how much money, what are the savings, what are the costs, and the numbers also can be about surveys, right? How happy are people after they've been moved, and how happy were they with the vendors or the processes and the timelines? So for me, in my experience, it's always boiled down to numbers.
How about you, Rebecca?
I agree with the numbers, but I do think there's something to be said about how people feel about the process, and that's harder to capture, which I think, Jaime mentioned surveys are great. But if you've got a high up person complaining about how frustrated they are with their move, that's, that just ruined your performance review. So I think it's the numbers plus, can you get in kind of that, how was the experience? Because I think, at least right now, it seems like a trend is, everyone's trying to cut costs. So you're never going to win on, I spent the least amount of money, because, to have a program, it requires money, right? To move people. It does. So how can you show other ways of success? And maybe that is savings in some ways, or maybe it's people had a really great experience. Then, doing follow-ups of, okay, they've been there 3 months, 6 months, team, how have they been doing in their new role? And showing this is a success for the business as well, too. So I think the hard numbers tell part of the story, but there's other things too as well that you can kind of bake in to show it's a successful program.
Yeah, how about you, David? What are your thoughts?
I think it's tough. I think it's really tough. I mean, again, I think Jaime mentioned numbers, absolutely. But then you're like, what are you showing, right? I mean, immigration, you're showing how many moves you did, how much did you spend, right? Versus a relocation, right? That might be, okay, I spent this much, these are the family sizes, whatever. But expatriates are more like, hey, we moved Jane to Ireland. What was her success factor? How do we know that Jane did successfully? Because she did X, Y, and Z, right? She met all the milestones. It's really difficult to measure and to provide a success story in mobility. You can definitely provide numbers, like how much did something cost? Yes, I moved Paul from the U.S. to South Africa, right? Or something like that. But, it's really a tough, and then, how do you measure happiness, right? And because people are like, my furniture got damaged. I don't love the moving company, or, my this thing is leaking and I don't have a refrigerator. How do you, that weighs on your program and the satisfaction factor. So it's really difficult to measure. And every company does it differently, right? And so it's tough. I don't think there's one right answer, to be honest.
Well, I know for the past 6 months, I've been working on quarterly business reviews where I kind of give, my clients how well their program is doing, where we see some recommendations. And a lot of it, what I'm seeing is about costs and how they're going to, because premium processing is now 2,805, right? And historically used to only be like $1,500, right? Or even paying for dependents. So what we're seeing is that clients are really asking those questions, like, what are your other clients doing? How can we save in our program? And, how can we actually get to where we need to be, but at a faster, more cost-effective rate, right? So, Jamie, do you have any tips for any of our global mobility managers out there on how to handle those types of challenges?
I think, the benchmarking is helpful to see what other companies are doing and how you can change your own program, but also it helps to explore how you can keep your own program and company competitive, right? To me, it's not just about like the cost savings, but if you can't offer one thing, what else can you offer, so that people would still want to come? Because it's not just about the company, but individuals, as they're thinking about moves for employment or countries, you do think about the benefits, right? So I think the benchmarking does help kind of weigh all of that.
David, anything you want to share about that? You
Yeah.
were one of the clients that would always ask me, what are your clients doing in the industry?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No. So, if you haven't realized this by now, the amount of money in your immigration function, you will probably be the second or third largest spend for legal costs. Short
Yes.
of like companies that spend millions on M&A, right? Like a GE or something. Like absent that, like if your typical program, your immigration costs will be the second or third largest legal firm spend across all of the firms. And that was actually consistent with my company. I measured it every 2 or 3 years. And so I would often ask, hey, Charina, hey, Jess, what are your other clients doing? What's competitive? It's better to be proactive to say, hey, listen, we used to premium process H-1B, amend and extends or extends, and so we don't do it anymore because, USCIS is now operating at a better cadence, right? We can do some cost savings here, and as a mobility professional, you can demonstrate, hey, we used to spend 25, it used to be 2,500, now it's 28, whatever, but we've cut that cost off. And so now we're showing you our support, that we're trying to save some money for you, yet we're not trying to compromise the experience, right? We don't need to premium process the extension anymore because it's not taking 6 to 9 months. It's now and so we can do things like that I think help demonstrate to the business our value add as well. But you're right, it is an investment. And that's constantly what I've told every business leader. I'm like, hey, you want to bring the best person into the organization. This is an investment. So you better make darn sure that is the right person, to the best way you know how, that this is the right person for you, because you will spend upwards of 10, 15, 20,000 on H-1Bs, I-140s, adjustment of status, the whole green card ship, right? It's and then extensions on top of it. It's easy. You can spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And then Charina and I have had this discussion where, technically speaking, some of the dependent costs are considered compensation. It should be a taxable event. So you now who's going to pay the tax on that? Is it the employee? Is it the company? And then you got to pay tax gross up on it. So for anybody new in mobility, learn what tax gross up is, because it's going to be one of the biggest pain points you're ever going to know. But anyway, so.
Well, I just remember one of the challenges that David and I had, just, with, the business saying we really need this person, and me telling David, hey, they only have so much time left on their visa in the US. And I don't know, David, if we can actually get to that point where they can actually stay. I can get them their green card by that point. And David, you and I talked about how, we had thought that, okay, maybe we could do it, but then it ended up being more work than we imagined, right? Because we couldn't hit that milestone. And we, it's just like the second round lottery came out, right? for the H-1B cap, and you have people that are maxing out on their STEM OPT, and the businesses need to start sending them out, right? Because they have to park them somewhere else. And that, I imagine, can be costly as well, right, Rebecca, is when you have to park them in another country because your intention when hiring them was that they stay in the U.S., but then because of the visa situations, you have to move the entire family out.
One suggestion I have for people listening to this is put the costs back to the business units. Because again, this is not Rebecca making the decision to hire this person. This is not Rebecca saying, we love this person, we want to park them, at our London office and then move them back to the US. So that just, I think, saved me a lot of headaches of, this is the engineering department, approved this cost for their portion of the business. If you're mad about the spend, go talk to them. Don't talk to me about it. And it's not, shifting the blame. It was getting everything approved, but it's something to be said about, they're making the best decisions for their team. I'm facilitating the move, but the costs are not my decision to make. So I think anywhere you can, maybe ask, WR or whoever your immigration law firm is, hey, can you put business unit into our invoices and then we can make sure that these are all approved. Little things like that, I think, really go a long way when you're looking at the really big line item of this is a crazy amount of money. What are you spending all of this money on, Rebecca?
Well, because it's like David said, it could be 30,000.
Yeah.
It could be 40,000, could be 50, could be more, could be $100,000 spend if you count it all up, so.
Yep. And it's not again, and it's not our programs, making this call. At some point they might say, okay, this is just too expensive for this employee, we're going to have to part ways. And that's also a fair decision. But again, it's not Global Mobility's decision to make. It's the business for what is best for their unit.
I remember David and I were having a tough week, and he would joke around about cocktails, and I shipped him margarita mixers, but I couldn't send him any tequila.
And it sat in my office for quite a while. And it sat in my office, and I was a very popular person that people would be like, oh, okay.
Yes, David and I had our times when we had a lot of challenges, and we just had to use humor and cocktails to get us through the day sometimes. So anything, Rebecca or Jamie, you want to share?
One of the most exciting things for me is I've been in this profession long enough, I've seen lots of visa approvals, but one thing that's been really fun for me is seeing families have their babies in the US, and the baby is a US citizen because mom and dad were here because of, the work that I put in. And so there's new US citizen babies. I think that's the most meaningful and amazing thing that, anyone could ever do.
Yeah. And then, they could sponsor them when they turn 21 for their green card.
If they're from a backlogged country, they might still be waiting.
Yeah, they would still be waiting. How about you, Jamie? Any fun stories to talk about in your day-to-day?
When David was talking earlier about COVID, there are definitely a lot of interesting things that come up then, just because we're all having to be so creative, and people move around and you don't even know they moved around because you don't see anybody during that time. But I think for what Rebecca said, usually the work that we do is sometimes unnoticed, sometimes underappreciated, right? So it's really nice when you think, okay, it's just another standard visa or another standard move, but then the person on the other end is just so appreciative. And so it's nice when you get those moments of appreciation. And that one moment could just outshine, the 15 other bad times that you had previously. And I think that's what keeps us going.
Yeah, chocolate always helps. Chocolate helps. I know, some of my clients have said, I had one client that was particularly difficult in Bern, Switzerland, and she was a student. She got stuck. She couldn't get her visa. And then wrote to everyone, and then she finally got her visa. And I got some nice Swiss chocolates at the end, and my team really appreciated it. So chocolates is really nice. So as we talk about the future of global mobility, and there's a lot of things happening, like David talked about, like if there's a typhoon in Thailand, or the whole Ukrainian situation, and things happening all over the world, how does that change your work and how you strategize, and how do you pivot in those situations? So we'll ask David.
Ooh, tough one. It you just have to be resilient, flexible. I think this is where the value of putting on your advisor hat comes on and saying, look, I don't know all the answers. I don't know. You might not even know some of the things in this country. I will do the research. I will get back to you. We will, but I think just being flexible and being ready to pivot as needed, I think is probably going to help you a lot more than, there comes a point where, yes, you have a policy. It's very important to have a framework and guardrails. I hands down. But I think as the pandemic has taught us, I think as international remote work has taught us, I think there's times where you have to be flexible, because if you're not, you are going to bend and break. And, you're going to make mistakes. And, sometimes you're just going to get frustrated and lose your empathy. I mean, I've done it, but to your point, to Rebecca's point, right? When you all of a sudden you have expats that have little babies and you're just like, oh my gosh, that's great, so you kind of get your energy again. And so I think that's probably for me the biggest challenge. I think in terms of what the future is going to hold, I think international remote work is going to be the next hot topic. I think also people coming back into the office, I moved home to be closer to my family in Kansas, but now I got to go back to Seattle where my office is located. What does that look like? What happens when you have 50 people that you got to do group moves for? What group move program are you going to set up so that everyone's treated the same, And so I think those are some of the big challenges that will happen in the mobility space.
So you're on your sabbatical. So will you
Yes.
come back to the global mobility space? And in what capacity?
Give me 2 or 3 more months. I think here. Okay, so here's the funny thing, right? If you would have told me 5, 10 years ago, or even 2, 3 years ago, hey, you're going to make it through the pandemic, quote unquote, okay. But by the way, you now have to take care of 2 older people, right? And you're going to burn out and this and that. I wouldn't have believed you. But I think sometimes life forces your hand and you have all these like quirky things happen. So Charina, I think we'll see what the future holds for me in mobility. It may not be back at my old position or something like that. It might be something different. Who knows?
But I think I respect that, because I think, Rebecca and Jaime, you can put in your points too, but as an immigration attorney, we're dealing with people's lives, right? I say my job is second to a surgeon sometimes, I feel like, right? And how do you deal with that, David, with the stress or the pressures of the movement of people? Like, what tips and pointers can you give to the audience about that?
Go to the gym. Don't eat your pain away. I mean, it's like that's all I'm going to say that much. Don't eat and drink your pain away. No, I think it's really important to find your happiness. Again, it's easier said than done, but we all have to find what makes us happy, and we got to take care of ourselves. Like I said, easier said than done, but it's a really true statement.
Well, you're doing it right now, so Yeah. And we miss you, but we can't wait till you come back when you're ready and up for, the fight again.
Hey,
Rebecca,
for everyone on the podcast, I'm the nasty, hateful client, right? My goal is to make Charina cry. That is my goal. If I can yell and scream loud enough and make Charina cry, I've done my job that day.
David would make me laugh. My calls with him every other week were the highlight of my week. So yes, David, but I know you're going to come back, or I'll just bring you back anyways. Rebecca, for you, where do you think the future of global mobility is?
I think at some point they're going to realize, hey, if all these jobs can be done remotely, can they be done in a country with a lower cost of living? And I think people are starting to realize that. But when the companies do, what does that mean? Right? So if it's getting harder and harder to get, I don't know, H-1B visas in the US. Could we put, and this job can be done remotely, where could we put these people that makes more sense for the company? And so I think that's going to be super interesting of if it's offshoring. I don't know what that will look like, if it's going to other countries, or I know, Canadian immigration is blowing up right now because the US is so hard to get into. So kind of where are the new hotspots going to be? I think
Well,
that's kind of exciting to me.
Well, I also think, in our bid for work or RFPs, I'm seeing more and more focus on the global services we provide, right? Not just US inbound, but outbound. Um, and Rebecca, your tip on how you manage the challenges and the stress of the position?
I think it's again, I'm still working on this one too. But I think really logging off at the end of the day and saying, okay, now it's time to take care of me and my family. I just spent however many hours helping other people, and I need to step away and do what I need to do. And whether that's exercise or see friends, or even some days it's okay, do laundry, get the stuff done around the house, But I think for me, it's okay, now it's time to take care of myself and my family. And I think everyone, the clients do understand that.
Well, my one global mobility manager I've worked with for like 12 years, I love her little catchphrase at the end of her email. It's always, my work day is not the same as your work day. Please don't feel compelled to respond to this email, right? And it just makes me feel better when I read it. Like the stress level goes down because I'm like, oh, she doesn't expect me to respond right away. I can do this tomorrow. But even just that little comment that she put in her email, it resonated with me, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And that's a really good point when you're working with people all over the world. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's all different time zones, and you could work 24 hours a day if
Yeah,
you don't take that break.
you could. All right, Jamie, where do you think, what's the future of global mobility?
Gosh, I don't know. I think Rebecca makes a really good point, with the different countries. Like, it almost seems, even now, I feel like even domestically, right? Certain states are offering companies and corporations different benefits. So you see some competition domestically. You're going to see that internationally, like which countries offer better immigration and different costs of living. So it's hard to say. We're already seeing some movement, right? But it's hard to say where that's going to lead. I honestly have no idea. But I think, like to David's point, we're going to be flexible. We're going to be adaptable, because if you're going to work in this field, you have to be. If you're not, it won't work.
And then your tips and pointers for how to manage the stress or just the challenges or just the pressures of the job?
What hasn't been said? I think, along with David and Rebecca, yeah, absolutely finding your balance, right? Whatever works for you. But like to your point, Charina, that one little comment making you feel better, please and thank you goes a long way, right? From us to us. And then personally for me, it was just learning how not to be so reactive. Things are going to happen. And if you can just take that step back, then that's how you can better serve your clients as well.
Yeah. It's what I find is if I'm just calm and I listen and I allow them to vent and then I just listen, it goes a long way. Right. So, I know there's a lot of election anxiety going around. And we're going to have a podcast on the election and immigration. But what are your sense about that and where we're heading? Because I think we all lived through global mobility during President Trump's administrations and the possibility that it could come back again. So any thoughts you want to share there, David?
I think the biggest challenge is going to be people are going to be nervous. I think they're going to ask a lot of questions. I would definitely try to make sure you read up and constantly contact your immigration partner your immigration team to be like, hey, what's going on? What are you hearing? What are some thoughts? What is your trade organization? What are they thinking about? Because, there comes a point where there's only so much you can do. But where you add value is trying to reassure that person, saying, hey, we understand your nervousness. We understand your concerns. We're going to try and give you the best facts that we possibly can. People are going to trade rumors and, stories. There's nothing I can do about that, right? Over Slack, over email, whatever. What I can do is I can say, actually, here's what's happening. Here's what we think is going to happen. Here's what the company's position is going to be. And just really be that voice of care, I think, because again, there's only so much you can do. And like I said, I've dealt with this across how many different countries. And so this is going to be another one.
Yeah. Rebecca, Jaime, anything you want to give?
I would just add hope for the best, plan for the worst. So start talking now if people are nervous. Okay, what is the plan? Telling someone that's nervous, oh, don't worry about it is, sometimes not the best advice, but it's having that conversation of, okay, maybe if your US visa doesn't go through, is there an option where you could work from another country? What would that look like? Okay, maybe it's a specific country. And so then they kind of can picture, all right, if plan A doesn't work, we've got a solid plan B, and I feel okay about that. So I think that's super helpful. And then also for your C-suite, plan for the worst with your budgets too. I think the numbers of requests for evidence we saw, will definitely increase costs if it does happen that way. But yeah.
Jaime, anything you want to share?
All of that was very great. I think personally, I'm a little nervous because I wasn't at a law firm during the Trump administration. So now I'm like, oh, shoot, now what do we do? We can't predict what's going to happen, right? But we can always plan. I think part of our roles as immigration lawyers is we give our clients as many options as there are available, and then we have contingency plans on top of the plans. And that's about all we can do. And we can control what we can, but we just have those plans available and we see what happens and then we adapt.
All right. With that, I want to thank my guests, but where can they find you, the global mobility professionals, if they have questions or they just want to reach out? Jaime, where can folks find you?
I am on the WR Immigration website, but I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can find me on either of those places.
How about you, Rebecca?
Same with me. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Be happy to chat.
And David?
Same. LinkedIn, David Nosey. I'm the one that's not part of KeyBank, and I don't run a dog fencing company in Alaska. So absent those two, you can probably find me. And honestly, I'm happy to talk about anything PEO related as well. I think that's, there's been pros and cons about PEO. I think there's a lot more emphasis on that. So if folks want to chat about that, give me a call. I started the program and I actually wound it down. So I know the full life cycle really well. So.
Maybe we do another podcast on that. With that, I want to thank my guests for coming today and just unveiling global mobility and sharing all your tips and pointers. I think they were super helpful. Be sure to follow WR Immigration on LinkedIn and stay tuned for our next Beyond Immigration Law podcast next month. Thank you.